Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of GameSphere. So I've been playing a few games this week, which I will be sharing my experiences, of course, with you today. So I'm going to be taking a look at the Secrets of Gindea, a game that seems to be perpetually in early access, but still worth a look, in my opinion, nevertheless. I have been playing the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion on the hardest difficulty, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And I've also been playing a couple of multiplayer games, which I would like to talk about too. But first, yes, the Secrets of Gindea, which actually there is a multiplayer element to that game, and a few friends of mine have been playing it. I have mostly been on the single-player mode, but in fact there have been people telling me that they probably wouldn't have gotten into the game at all if it wasn't for the cooperative single-player element, which, as I understand it, is quite entertaining. So the single-player parts of the game that I've been enjoying have been the roguelike sort of arcade mode, where you choose your character. It's by and large a pixel art RPG game, but this there's a mode that puts it in the makes it a bit roguelikey, and there's more of a traditional RPG story adventure section, which also then has the multiplayer role-playing element to it as well. But the roguelike part is you build your character, you get a new character at the beginning of every playthrough. You can level up as you progress through a procedurally generated dungeon, and it's rather as simple as that. I must admit I've not gotten too far into it, simply because I'm not great at the combat and tend to get quite easily overwhelmed. That's just a lack of skill on my part, I guess, but I certainly do find it fun, and I do actually find roguelikes quite fun, even though it's a genre of game that I'm not particularly good at. But the story adventure, and I've really only spent a couple of hours in this, so don't take this as a complete review, but just more of a first impressions, and I'll probably come back to the game, or I'll probably come back to it on this channel when I've played it a little bit further and probably gone through the multiplayer. But the story is kind of like, it does have that, it has a little bit of a JRPG vibe to it, similar to what you might get out of the Pokemon games, that you start off with, obviously, your starting character. You can customize your character. First off, you can customize them cosmetically at the beginning, but then as you progress, you can choose whether or not to specialize in one of the forms of melee combat, whether or not, you want to go into archery, or the 4 types of elemental magic. Now, I've been focusing my main character on being like an earth mage, so that's like a magic based character that uses earth magic, which is pretty cool. But yeah, you can use like fire magic and like air magic and ice magic and all this kind of stuff, as well as like archery and all that, or a mixture between the two. And the game is actually very, very forgiving in how you attribute your points. You can refund your points. You can actually switch specializations of your character with basically 0 penalty, as I understand it, which does allow you to sink quite a few hours into a game, but not have that sort of regret of a bad decision you made hours ago, or anything like that. Like, it's a forgiving game in this department, and I kind of like that. Like, I don't know whether or not I've softened a little in old age, or I've just changed how I approach how I play my games, but I do appreciate having a little bit of forgiveness in games, and I think as I get older, I find myself being a little bit more forgiving in terms of playing on lower difficulties as well, just in games in general, because I guess maybe it's because enjoying a game is more important than becoming good at it, I guess, in my mind. And if you're constantly overwhelmed, or you constantly feel like you're constantly feel like you're overwhelmed or anything like that, that it can just sort of push you off a game. But I don't know, maybe that's just me or what have you. But the thing about Secrets of Gindea as well is that as the name sort of subtly implies, there can be a fair bit of grinding in this game. So you come up against a particular mission, and you're not good enough for it. You can go away and you can start grinding away at killing various critters in the environment, and eventually you'll become a high enough level that you'll be able to overcome anything eventually, if you just sort of put in enough time. So it's not necessarily going to be the most challenging game if you're just willing to grind, or if you decide to sort of master the mechanics of the game, you can sort of shortcut that and beat levels at a lower character level if you're just willing to get good, as they say. So it does give a good deal of scope, even though the options and everything like that are quite straightforward. The leveling up process is quite straightforward and also very forgiving. It allows you a lot of scope in how you can approach the combat element of the game. There are some games that are just fetch quests or some such similar thing. I'm not, and that's kind of charming in the way that it appears in many other RPGs. Now, I will say this game is not really exceptional in any way. I did enjoy the pixel art, but it's not especially like it's good pixel art, it's solid pixel art, it's great for the atmosphere, but it's not going to move you. It's not I don't want to say there's nothing special about it, but it's sort of relatively standard pixel art for the genre. The gameplay mechanics, they're great. It's great. It's not groundbreaking, but it's great. It's fun. The character building, again, it's not complex. I do not like complex character building. I do like the straightforwardness of it, and how magic works in the character and in the game is simple and straightforward. I like that. I really dislike complex magic systems in fantasy games. It just I don't know. It's just it doesn't move me. It doesn't grab me. So I think that Secrets of Gindea gets a lot right, and it's a game that's been in development for a while. The last update, if I remember correctly, was the 18th of December, so only a couple of days ago. And it does seem to be moving forward. It's almost like one of those games that, like, it says it's an early access. I came across it as like 0 bugs playing it. So it just seems to me like as the content is being added to the game, it will wear the moniker of early access. So I know that some people do not like buying early access games, so take that on board, but the game to me did not feel incomplete, although, like I say, like I've only been playing it for only a couple of hours now. But then again, I've known people that have been playing on that game for more than 10 hours, and to be honest, it's not a particularly expensive game. I'm just going to check on the store page to see how much it was. So the game is £10.99. So I would imagine that's probably about 15 American dollars. And if you can get a good 10 to 15 hours out of it, I would personally say that's worth the price. Obviously, that's going to be very subjective to you. You know, whether or not you consider the dollars per gameplay hour to be to be a good identifier as to whether or not a game's has value for money. I mean, again, when you're looking at games like that, do you take into account grinding? Like, you can easily spend many hours just grinding away at building your character up and becoming a mighty mage or a great swordsman or woman. And you wouldn't necessarily consider them premium gameplay hours there, would you? But yeah, the game is charming. It's fun. It's kind of chill. Like I was playing, like when I was doing the getting the gameplay footage and as I was working my way through it, I was enjoying a podcast in the background. So it could be one of those games, kind of chill, and I'm really enjoying the chill games these days. So yeah, I mean, take that for what you wish. But yeah, if you're just looking for a sort of a cozy, chill RPG, yeah, this isn't too bad. This is not too bad at all. But like many of my friends who have also played the game, they say it's not groundbreaking. It's not game of the year material by their standards. It's not going to make my game of the year list, but it's kind of fun. I've heard good things about the multiplayer elements. I'll try and get to that soon, and not a bad game. So, yeah, on that note, I think it is probably time to go to our first ad read. This episode of GameSphere is brought to you by, of course, DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean recently announced their new app platform service, which is a solution to build modern cloud-native apps. With App Platform, you can build, deploy, and scale apps and static websites quickly and easily. Simply point to your GitHub repository and let the App Platform do all the heavy lifting. It has support for Node.js, Python, Go, PHP, Ruby, static sites, and Docker. DigitalOcean runs their app platform on their own infrastructure, so your costs are significantly lower than with other products. Plus, they built this new app platform on top of DigitalOcean Kubernetes, providing a smoother migration path so you can take more control over your infrastructure setup. As a listener of the GameSphere podcast and the Destination Linux network, you can get started for free. And in fact, better than free, because DigitalOcean is giving you $100 of credit when you sign up by going to do.co/DLN. That's do.co/DLN. We want to thank DigitalOcean for sponsoring this episode of the GameSphere and for generally being kind to the Destination Linux network. Thank you very much, DigitalOcean. That's wonderful. So I've just finished recording a playthrough on my gameplay channel that has actually been quite popular. It's of the fourth Elder Scrolls game, Oblivion. The twist is that I've been playing it on the hardest difficulty, which is quite well known as being disproportionately difficult, ridiculously difficult, so difficult that the game is fundamentally unplayable. And I've kind of been sort of taking on the challenge. Now, I finished it before on the hardest difficulty, but I've never sort of chronicled my journey through it. The only way that I've ever managed to play through that game is by being very gamey, by looking at all the game rules, by sort of manipulating the game world in incredibly cheap ways that are far and away removed from the immersive storytelling style of the game. So for those of you that are unaware, and the Oblivion might be quite old now, so there might be some people who are unaware of the Elder Scrolls series, or particularly the Elder Scrolls Oblivion. In my opinion, one of the better Elder Scrolls game. You can choose a role-playing game, an action role-playing game, perhaps, where you build a character. You can choose from any number of races with any number of abilities, strengths, and weaknesses. You can build a stealth-based character, a magic-based character, a fighting-based character, and then you go off into an open world. You take on quests. There is a main quest. There are quests related to your character build, like a Thieves Guild quest, which will test your abilities of stealth, a Mages Guild quests, which are supposed to test your abilities as a mage, but they're not particularly interesting quests. We all know it. Then there's Fighters Guild quests, where you do quests related to your fighting abilities. There are also many other quests where you're an assassin, quests where you're doing tasks or the bidding of various gods in the world. And the game is in my opinion, really quite interesting. I love the atmosphere of it. The soundtrack is amazing. The colors and the style, the graphical style of it, I think holds up really quite well, although many people I know will disagree with me on that one. The one thing I think that everyone disagrees with is that the facial animations were not particularly, or have not aged particularly well, and having, I think it's like 3 voice actors do the role of hundreds of characters in the world is definitely not great for immersion. The game that preceded it, Morrowind, the third Elder Scrolls game, had mostly text-based dialogue, which was not voiced, and in my mind, worked a lot better. Now, I know that when they came to develop in Oblivion, they had this idea that they wanted to make it more mainstream. They wanted to bring it out to people who were not necessarily willing to read pages upon pages upon pages of dialogue to work out what to do in a quest, to really, the they wanted to engage with gamers that were not necessarily going to throw themselves into the narrative depths of this incredibly substantive world, just so that they could get from the beginning to the end of the game. Like, they wanted to appeal to, more casual gamers as well as your RPG nerds, and everyone in between. And they made some missteps, as they always do, especially when you try and broaden a game that's made its name as being, like particularly good in its niche, and then sort of bringing it, expanding it beyond that niche. We see it time and time again, and it, in many ways, it kind of is this problem with this idea of companies taking like an intellectual property that's done well and trying to make it, like, push it to do even better. Obviously, that's, like, from a company's point of view, something rather sensible and straightforward to do. You take something that has a core fan base that people really like, and quite frankly will buy the game depending on whether or not it's good or bad, or buy the next one in the series because they are personally invested in the series. And then try and broaden it out so that you capture a wider audience. It's, selling a certain number of games is, like, no longer enough. They have to sell as many as possible at any cost, it seems, in many ways. Anyway, maybe I'm just being cynical, but it certainly seems that they sort of trended in that direction under the stewardship of Todd Howard, and Skyrim is, like, to me, an even larger broadening. And the further down the Elder Scrolls road it seems to go nowadays, I've got to admit, the less interested I get. But, like I say, I'm just cynical at this point. But anyway, Oblivion is quite good, despite having huge glaring faults. But there was just a charm to that game, and I think they captured a really beautiful atmosphere with it as well. Like, if you were a thief, I felt like a thief. If I was a warrior, like, a knight in shining armor, I felt like a knight in shining armor. If I was a mage trying to master the mysteries of the other world, I felt like that. Like, for me, it captured this great way of actually building a character how I wanted to build a character, using reasonably simple parameters. There were, I think, one of the big problems with Oblivion, if we're completely honest, and I think a lot of people saw this, is also the leveling. So this used a leveling system where, as you would progress through the level, so you'd get better, you build up your skills, and then as you built up your skills, you would increase your character level. And as you increased your character level, the levels of the enemies around you also raised, and the levels and the quality of the loot that you would find in various dungeons would raise in accordance with your level. So you had this very sort of fluid way of transitioning through the game where you were a level 1 character. You'd go off and do whatever you wanted. If you want to do Thieves Guild quests, you do Thieves Guild quests. If you want to do Dark Brotherhood quests, the Assassin quest, then you go and do them. If you want to do the main quest, you go and do that. But all throughout all of those quests, you would remarkably find gear and rewards that would be just fitting to your level. You'd never find something that was that would ever give you a massive edge in the game, nor would you really find stuff that was, you would find stuff that was beneath you, stuff that wasn't worth picking up, as you always tend to do in these games, but you would never find anything that really excelled. And in Morrowind, by comparison, there would be really good stuff hidden about the world, but it would be hidden in dungeons with that would be guarded by high level creatures. So if you were a low level, you just go in that dungeon and you just get booted out pretty sharply, shall we say, and you'd have to come back when you were stronger. And I think that sort of gave you a good in-game lesson, as it were, is don't take on challenges until you're ready for them, fundamentally. Whereas with any quest in Oblivion, for the most part, you could just take on, and it would be leveled accordingly. I think there might be some exceptions to that regarding the DLC and the Shivering Isles DLC, which is really good. I really enjoyed that as well. I love what it brought to the game. Very weird. Like, think of the fantasy RPG version of Alice in Wonderland. It's quite something. But you got to love the creativity in that regard. So I've got a lot of good things to say about that game. It truly is quite a big part of why I enjoy games as much as I do. It's also available on GOG. I haven't shout out GOG in on this podcast yet, but yeah, I've got a lot of games on the GOG.com game store. I was playing it on the hardest difficulty. The series is still unfolding over on my gaming channel, Gaming with Werewolves. Yeah, like I did actually find myself looking at the rules of the game, looking at how difficulty is affected, and difficulty is affected in a very, very, very straightforward way. The difficulty slider only affects combat. So if the middle of the difficulty slider is 1v1, you hit with 1 damage, your opponents will hit with 1 damage, you're equally, for the most part, matched, right? If you have it on the easiest of difficulties, you will hit, if your opponent hits with 1 damage, you will hit with 6 damage, right? So you have that 6-to-1 advantage on them. And then vice versa with the hardest difficulty. So your opponent will hit with 6 times the damage that you will be able to hit them, giving you an absolute massive disparity in damage and survivability of damage. And it kind of, despite being ridiculously difficult, it does actually make you think incredibly strategically in a lot of different ways. And it kind of, in some ways, I'm not going to say it feels realistic, because the thing is, it's like when you can get killed in a couple of blows of a sword, but your opponent, you can be there swinging a sword, bang, 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 again, 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 again. That doesn't, they feel, I suppose you'd usually use the term bullet spongy, sword spongy. But having that, knowing that one clean sweep of sword would kill you, makes you approach the game entirely differently. And that's really kind of interesting. That's really kind of good. Like, it makes you treat your enemies like they are to be feared, even the lower level ones. And I like that. You don't go through a dungeon just killing everything in your path. You're not this massive, mighty creature anymore. You can only defeat you can only get through the game with stealth, basically, and magic-assisted stealth at that. One of the things that I do actually tend to... Now, there is a great element of stealth in Oblivion. They do stealth really well for a game that does, combat and magic and everything else, right? And a game that touches on so many different aspects. It's never going to be as good as a direct stealth game like, for example, the Hitman franchise. However, they do stealth as well as you could possibly get from a action role-playing game of that type. They do it as really as well as they could do. But one of the criteria I consider a failing at when you look at a stealth game is whether or not there's an invisibility option, whether or not it's done through magic or like technology or any other kind of game mechanic. If your stealth character can turn invisible, that to me just indicates that either the level design is wrong, or level design is not wrong, but like not as good as it could be, that the stealth mechanics are not as refined as they could be. There is something wrong there, one way or the other, that require that having this invisibility option like has to fill in. Because the stealth in other capacities does not work as well. And I think this is shown in Oblivion. It's shown in Oblivion because a mage can fundamentally do stealth better than a thief. And I don't think that should be the case in any fantasy RPG kind of game. Like, a thief should always be the master of stealth. It just feels wrong regardless. But no, like because a thief does not use magic unless their character is specifically sanctioned to, unless it's built into the character build, or unless that character goes out of their way to learn magic. But in the core pure thief run of a game, using all of the thief traits, all of the thief skills, you do not have invisibility in the same way that if you were a mage playing like a pure mage, all the mage skills, all the mage bits and pieces that go along with it, a mage can then become invisible and just out thief a thief, using their skill set. Like, and Oblivion in particular is very, very, very overpowered. Like they use the illusion skill, the skill that makes you turn invisible. That is way overpowered, especially towards the higher levels. And of course, with the Oblivion game, you can grind very easily your magic skills up. Magic skills in particular are very easy to grind, and as a result, you can become a very powerful mage by challenging yourself very little. So you can build up this very powerful mage character in a very easy but grindy way to actually defeat the game using stealth better than a stealth character. And I kind of dislike that. Like, I know that in the Elder Scrolls games, in many ways, the idea of magic is the embodiment of gaming the world. And this is also seen in Morrowind. And in fact, in Morrowind, one of the main one of the more important characters refers to I think it's the higher levels of magic, which is a subtle reference to the ability to save and reload being like the ultimate magical power that you can have in a game. Which I always thought was a bit cute. It was always a bit like, yeah, that's kind of, like, I get what you do. There's a little bit of fourth wall break in there, a little bit, which I did find to be quite amusing. So, it was a challenge. I had to manipulate the game a lot. I had to manipulate the leveling system a lot, and in ways that I didn't necessarily anticipate, but I did it, and I did win. I did complete the game, so I can tell you that now. Spoiler alert for those of you that are looking on to see how my adventures on the channel fold out. But I've completely got the game, so the game is the gameplay videos are being rolled out on my channel weekly, which is kind of cool, and yeah. They seem to be pretty popular on my channel, which not to brag, but yeah, for those of you that are fond of the game, I have been asked to try and go through the game in non-magical capacity because of these reasons of grindiness and because of these reasons of gaming the gaming system a little bit too much. I must say maybe. The thing is, when it comes to the highest difficulty, combat on the highest difficulty in Oblivion, is in a 1v1 battle, maybe. But the trouble is, if you're fighting someone and then someone else comes at your side, you're done for. You're donezo, mate. And I don't know how you do that. Would you have to like bottleneck them in a narrow corridor? What if there's not a narrow corridor? How do you deal with magic? Yada yada yada. There's a lot to do there, and is a challenge. I might think about it. I might come back to it, but for all intents and purposes, I had a good time. I really did enjoy the game. I must admit, I think I would have had more fun if I didn't. I think with Oblivion, I have more fun when I don't use magic. In the same way that with most games, if there is a non-combat option, I have more fun playing the non-combat option. I like the idea of using your mind to get through these obstacles that seemingly require violence, and I love the idea of thinking outside the sort of the violent archetype of so many games, and that's why I kind of like stealthing games. I don't mind magic when it's done well, but magic is done poorly quite regularly. So there we go. Because it almost seems like the de facto paradigm of so many games is to approach with violence, that when you have the option not to, I always find that option the most interesting. That's one of the reasons why that attracted me to the Hitman franchise as well. And there we go, another episode where I have to mention Hitman, but I did so previously actually. But yeah, but it's that, like, even though the game is predicated on an act of violence in terms of assassinating people, you get marked up. You get given points and rewards for not killing anyone else other than your target. The idea that non-violence is rewarded in that game really intrigues me from when I picked up Hitman 2 Silent Assassin many years ago. And the idea of being rewarded for not killing people in a game, that was kind of novel to me. I really liked that. Or the idea of being able to approach a level any number of ways and all of those ways having value, which I thought was great for creative problem solving. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but Oblivion's a little bit like that as well. Like, you get given a problem, you get given a level, particularly in some of the side levels, and depending on your character, depends on how you approach them, whether or not you approach them with violence or whether or not you approach them by, smooth talking or bribery or stealth or magic or whatever. Like, many of the levels, they just provide you with the problem. You're the one that has to come up with the solution. That's pretty cool. But it was done. I enjoyed it. I think I'm going to come back to Oblivion sometime in the future. I don't know if I'll be coming back at it with the highest difficulty. And feel free to answer this one in the various feedback forms. You can email, and link to the forum will be included in the show notes here, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. But and the comment on the YouTube video as well, if you wish. But do you folks ever get a little bit frustrated at games where you can adjust the difficulty mid-game? I get that it can be quite forgiving. I get that for certain players, if you find yourself in a corner, having the option to make the game a little bit easier, to get out of that corner, to make the game more enjoyable, and that's fundamentally why we play games at the end of the day. I get the value in that, but to me, having that ability right there and then, right in the options menu, like you'd get in Oblivion, like you had in a few games at that time, of just like being able to adjust that slider mid-game. And I know people who have used it both ways. Like, I know people who have come up against an impossible challenge and have made the game easier. I also know people that have become over-leveled in the game and have decided to make the game more difficult to challenge themselves, to actually give their character a continued sense of worth. Because if you're just knocking down everything in your path so easily, the game loses its magic there. Like, no fight seems consequential. So it does certainly go both ways, but I've always kind of felt like it that it took away from committing to a difficulty in the first place. And I don't know, I'd be interested to hear how other people feel about that. Perhaps, like if there was maybe a middle compromise would be that. And I think that some games probably do employ this, where you have a particular achievement that gets unlocked for completing a game from beginning to end in a particular difficulty, maybe. But I don't know. It just to me feels a little bit strange. Like, oh, you're difficult? Well, you can make the game a little bit easier. But then again, plugging in 10 hours into a game and then suddenly realizing that you've set the wrong difficulty, you how many people are then going to go back and play the whole other 10 hours? And catch up. I don't know. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on it. I'm sure there are great arguments on either side of this. But yeah, and for those of you that haven't played it, I don't know whether or not this is one of those games that has aged, or I mean, to me it's aged well. To others, less so. I don't know how a person who has never played the game and would pick it up today would feel about it. I know that, for example, the original Deus Ex, people who have picked it up, like, the game's 20 years old now, and people picking it up today do not like it on the whole. Even people that like the genre and like the themes of the game, who push through hours upon hours upon hours of it, still end up not liking it. Whereas that game has not aged as well as it has to me, because I fell in love with it at a time when it was more relevant. So it's strange how our perspectives are different on these kind of things, and all that. Okay, and now for the second ad read of the podcast. All kinds of terrible things can happen when you don't take care of your digital security, and that, of course, includes your passwords. The password manager used and trusted by the Destination Linux network is Bitwarden. Bitwarden lets you set up things like a PIN to easily access your password manager, as well as additional authentication such as master passwords and adding phrases to fingerprint security, all the things to keep your passwords safe. Bitwarden is the easiest and safest way for individuals, teams and businesses to store, share and sync sensitive data. Go to bitwarden.com/DLN to get started for free To make things even better, Bitwarden is 100% open source. You can self-host and their code is audited. Go to bitwarden.com/DLN to get started for free. The $10 a year premium account gets you 1 gigabyte of encrypted file storage, 2-step login with YubiKey, U2F, Duo, Vault health reports, time-based one-time password authenticator storage and generation, priority customer support. So, from the bottom of my heart, I would like to thank Bitwarden for sponsoring this episode of GameSphere and for all round being a good egg to the Destination Linux network. Thank you very much. So, for many of us, games are a social enterprise, and in many cases that applies to me. I've got an old friend from school, and we catch up over a game of golf, more specifically golf with friends. So I thought I would talk a little bit about that game in this particular segment. It's a great game. I know that many of the Destination Linux network folks have played it. I know that we've had game fests where we've played it. In fact, I've played it myself with some of the good old Destination Linux crew. It's a great social game. It's one of those games that you can just pick up and play for the first time, and in many cases just do quite well. It is a crazy mini golf kind of game. Crazy golf, mini golf. I don't know the proper expression for it, but you know what I mean. Like, it's the kind of golf where you knock it through a windmill, that kind of golf thing, but a little bit wackier than such. It's certainly evolved a fair bit since I started playing it. It was originally called Golf with Friends, but I believe due to some kind of trademark intellectual property shenanigans, they had to change it to Golf with Your Friends, I think. But yeah, it's a golf game. It's a straightforward golf game. You can customize the rules. You've got public rooms. You've got private games. You can, I believe, unlock various things, but I'm not too familiar with it. I've unlocked some cosmetics myself, but I don't know what the various criteria for it is. You can actually play it on GeForce Now, and I quite enjoy that because it might not necessarily be a game I've got installed on any current system at any given time, but if some old friend shows up out of the blue and fancies a game, I can just fire up a browser and get the game going. It's certainly become a lot more polished than it started. It started out being an incredibly janky game, but now is really quite smooth and fun to play. There's quite a few levels as well. Now, I'm personally a good old fan of the forest levels. Those are the levels that I think most people will tend to play the most because casual players will kind of recognize them, but at the same time, they're also quite fun to play, even for people like myself who have played those levels quite a lot. We also played the space station levels, some of which are the PlayStation. Oh, what's the proper term for it? Course, I guess. The 18-hole course, which for the most part is really good. I did quite like that. There were some holes. Sorry, I'm just getting mad around the old terminology there. There's some holes that were a little bit like, each of the courses has like a gimmick. So the sort of the beginning, the default course is like just a forest. You play some golf through a forest. It's quite nice. It's very what you might expect out of a golf game. But then there's a pirate themed course. There's an ancient Egypt themed course. There's a Candyland themed course. There's a pirates themed course. There's a worms, like as in Worms the game themed course. What else is there? There's quite a few others actually as well. I don't even think I've played all of the courses because it's the kind of game where you'd like to play a course a few times over and like to get familiar with courses, because some of the courses are wacky enough that it really, really does help and benefit you to actually just know vaguely how the course is put together. You don't have to be an expert. You never have to be an expert. It is one of those games where the main objective is to have fun. You do have that social element to it. It's not super competitive. I'm sure some people take the competition too seriously, but if you want something where you can just have a chat over a game of golf, this is a really good game to do it. You can adjust various timers and stuff like that as well if you want to be particularly casual. every course has a couple of holes that are just like, not great, that are a little bit frustrating. But we were playing the space station course, and one of the things about that is that you have singularities that can throw the ball off course, which is a bit peculiar. You've also got anti-gravity fields, so you kind of have to learn to play with those. That gets a bit wacky. I actually quite enjoyed the Candyland course. Now, I did not like the assault on the eyes that is the Candyland course. Like that, it's too much colour. It's so saccharine. It's something else. But the actual course itself, really quite fun indeed. But I did feel myself like getting a sugar high just playing those levels. It really like it's the color scheme. It's something else, But fun set of levels there. I like the pirate levels as well. I like the ancient Egypt levels. That can be quite fun. I think the last couple on that particular course are a little bit I don't know, illogical, I guess. I mean, we're talking illogical about Crazy Golf, but whatever. But all in all, like, it's fun, and that's what really matters in a game, isn't it? It's fun. So yeah, I just thought I'd talk a little bit about it. It's a great game. You can pick it up on Steam. You can play it on GeForce Now. Most people I know actually have that game. Like, it is one of those games that many people pick up from time to time. But it's a great social game if you want to catch up with some old friends. It's a great thing to do as you talk, and yeah. Like, what's more to say about it? Like, it's not again, it's not one of those games that's groundbreaking. It's not one of those games that's going to change your life. It's not going to be one of those games that you spend over 1,000 hours on, I bet. But it's fun and it's enjoyable, and I do have fond memories of playing that game. And part of those fond memories are going to be the great company that I've enjoyed playing that game. With the people I've been playing that game with. But at the end of the day, for me, that's enough. Like, if I'm having a good time, if I'm enjoying myself, if I am doing something which I feel is adding to my life by spending quality time with people I care about, and this game sort of facilitates that in its way, I can't ask for more, really, can I? So that's really all I've got to say about it. Really all I got to say about it. So I think I'm going to wrap up there for today's podcast. But thank you as always, folks, for joining me. I'm going to try and do some feedback do a feedback segment in next week's show. So please, any thoughts you have, do feel free to email me. I will, of course, put the email down in the show notes, or if you're watching on YouTube, the description. But you can also catch me you can catch all my social medias on chrisware.uk, which will include like Mastodon and all that kind of stuff. But also I hang around in the Destination Linux Network forums. So just go to the gaming section. You don't need to seek out anything to do with the show. Just go to the gaming section. That'll be fine. I hang around there. And if you've got any opinions you would like to voice, any feedback on the show, or just any thoughts on games in general, please do feel free to leave them there. But thank you very much for joining me. It's a pleasure, as always. I've been Chris Ware, and you have been listening to, or possibly watching, The Gamesphere. Toodaloo.